I think everyone's had a chance to get their lunch, and when I was in the final years of my undergraduate education, I had gotten my acceptances to medical school. I didn't have any physicians in my family. I had some ideas as to what I might be getting into, but I'm not sure where those ideas came from. A friend of mine's father was a ENT, and he gave me a copy of a book called The House of God, and I read it that summer between undergraduate and my first year of medical school. And I found it very entertaining, and I thought, well, it can't really be that way. Little did I know, over the next 14 years as I went through medical school and residency and fellowship, how much the words in that book would help me process some of the more outlandish experiences that I went through and help validate some of the feelings that I had as I went through those experiences. I'm very pleased that Dr. Samuel Shem is with us here today, the author of The House of God. Dr. Shem is on the faculty at NYU University Medical School. He's a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, as well as he was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. He's published many books, written many plays, but I'm particularly thankful that he wrote the book, The House of God, and I'm going to leave it there and with great enthusiasm welcome Samuel Shem to our meeting.
Thanks, Mike. Well, thank you, Mike. Are we getting audio or not? Yeah? Yeah, okay, good. Well, I am delighted to be here. One of the big reasons is the title of the conference, which is The World. And I don't think I've ever been at a conference that mentioned the world in the title, and I'm just delighted. And I'll just share with you, I'm going to talk about the new novel, Man's Fourth Best Hospital, at the end. I'm going to, for the first time, read some stuff from that hospital. It's a sequel to The House of God. But in Man's Fourth Best Hospital, the fat man is back. Everybody, most of the other characters are back, a little older. And he says to his group, which is, you know, the Runt and Chuck and Hyper Hooper and Eat My Dust, he says to them, you know, we have to pay attention. The patient is the world. The world is in the rooms, especially now. You can't go see a patient without understanding all of the stuff, where the water comes from, with pesticides now, and where the garbage goes. So medicine, the patient is never the patient. You all know that. It's all the other stuff in the world, especially now that the world is so interconnected. I want to thank Dr. Webb and Teresa Puskidia, who has been wonderful in arranging this, Mike Webb, sorry. And what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to take you through my journey via the books, some of the books, and starting with The House and ending with Man's Fourth. And as you know, I mean, I just feel like such a lucky guy. But for the flicker of a butterfly's wing, right, none of us would be here, right? And I've had such good luck all the way along. I can't tell you. I'm going to tell you some of the bizarre. I mean, if I hadn't, for instance, gotten the Rhodes Scholarship, I would have wound up as a divorced alcoholic neurosurgeon at the best medical school, you know. So, and I'm also very happy that this is the 40th anniversary year of the House of God. which is quite amazing. And I'm glad that Man's Fourth will come out in November, which will be a great thing. When I wrote The House of God and it came out, I was not the most favorite person around the Harvard Medical School system, since it was one of the hospitals of that system. I'm lucky, you see. I don't run on fear. I run on guilt. And so I got to, but then it got popular, et cetera, and I got to thinking it was safe to tell people that I was the author. And one night my wife and I were at a potluck supper for our daughter, and I was wandering around trying to figure out who to talk to, and I saw these two women, and I overheard, oh, they're both doctors, great. And then I thought, oh, doctors at the Beth Israel Hospital, my alma mater, I'll just have something in common. And I sat down and listened, and then at a break in the conversation, I said, well, you know, I may not be one of the most popular doctors at the Beth Israel Hospital. And one of them looked at me and with venom said, well, you can't be as bad as that guy that wrote that book. And there was this delicious silence, right? Do I tell her or not? Well, of course I told her, and she blushed beet red, and that was the last play date our daughter ever had with her daughter. I write for a couple of reasons. I just want to, the title of the talk is Staying Human in Medicine, from the House of God to Man's Fourth. But the question is, what's inhuman, and how do we stay human in this profession that we love, most of us? And what I realized many years after writing this book and other books, I write for two reasons. One, to draw attention to an injustice. And the House of God was about the injustice and cruelty of medical training. The second is to show the danger of isolation and the healing power of good connection. The danger of isolation and the healing power of good connection. What's good connection? I'm going to tell you. My wife and I, Janet Suri, have done an awful lot of work on that in terms of gender dialogues between men and women. My father grew up in New York. He was the son of immigrants, and he wanted to be a doctor, but he lived in New York, and he couldn't get into med school because of the Jewish quotas. So he wanted me to be a doctor. I wanted to be something else. I didn't know what, but I didn't. He was a dentist. He wound up. I didn't want to be that for sure. And so when I went to Harvard, I was lucky I got into Harvard from a small town. And when I got to Harvard, I took the pre-med courses, but I really wanted to be something like a writer. I thought that, you know, I had a chance then. And everybody had to take the freshman writing course, okay, and write these things. And so I jumped into it. There was a woman named, I'll never forget her, Miss Heller, a graduate student. I worked like hell on my first paper, handed it in, thought, gee, this has got to be pretty good. Get it back, there's not a mark on it. I say, oh, must be a perfect paper. She didn't want to mark it, you know. And then I looked closer, and down at the bottom was "See Me," little red pencil letters. I see it to this day. See me. So I go to see her, thinking maybe she wants to, you know, congratulate me or something. So this is the first feedback from this great big institution that I thought I was taken because of my athletic prowess too, you know. And she said, quote, "This paper is too terrible to mark. It's below F." Whoa, that's pretty low, you know. And tears came to my eyes. My vision of being a writer, here it was. I was done, you know, I was well done. So she tried to tell me what was wrong, and I tried to do what she said, and it went that way, F, or no, I think I got up to F, you know, F, D minus, great work, you know. And then that was freshman year. In the spring of freshman year, I was on the golf team. I was a good golfer. And I was playing around with this guy named Ray. Ray was this blonde Adonis from Florida. I don't know how he got in. He definitely got in he was a swimmer too. And so we're talking, and I'm complaining about still being back in the C minus D plus range. at the end of the year. And he says, well, I'm getting a straight A from her. Now, this is about a 12-person seminar. Now, Ray was stupid. I don't even know if he could have written his name properly. He's a great golfer, great swimmer. It was clearly geographic distribution. Said, you're getting an A from her? He said, yeah, I've been sleeping with her all year. And all of a sudden, see me, maybe, see all of me, So that was the first lesson, but it had an effect on me. I never wrote another word, fiction or plays or anything, at Harvard. I did other stuff. I figured Harvard knows best, right? Then I lucked out. I kind of got, this is one of these butterfly flickers. I lucked out, got to Oxford, and I figure, I look over my shoulder, she can't get me now, And I started writing. And that went pretty well, and I kept writing and writing. And then I had a kind of one of these spiritual experiences. We drove all the way down to the Sahara Desert from Oxford, and we had camel auctions and smoked keef and everything. And I realized I wanted to be a writer, period. No more medical school, which is what I was planning to do. And what I had done, though, I was enrolled in a PhD program, and I had to, and I wanted out of it, but I didn't have the guts to tell my wonderful advisor, a guy named Dennis Noble, that I didn't want to be, working on that anymore. So I asked him to get me a computer. Now, this was 69. There weren't computers, but there were kind of things like computers, sophisticated. So I go on this Morocco trip, have this spiritual awakening, partly drug-induced, and came back to Oxford. I had a beard and a jalabi, and I went into the lab to pick up my mail, rainy day in Oxford, and there were these boxes. The computer had arrived. The guy had gone out on a limb and gotten me this, and I felt terrible. So I went to the market. I bought a steak and a bottle of wine, and went over to his house, knocked on the door, and here I am in my jalabi, and he says, oh, come on in, and I blurted out, I said, Dennis, I don't want to be a scientist. I want to be a writer. And my heart was in my throat. And he said, well then, Bergman, have a sherry. He didn't care. And I've had good connections from time to time when people said, look, go write. That's what you're good at, not this stuff. The next step was, you may have heard, there are some people my age here, you may have heard there was this funny thing called the Vietnam War going on in 1960, well, this was 69. And I had a very easy choice to make between Vietnam or Harvard Med. And I thought, rather than getting killed, maybe I would help keep people alive. So I went there with the idea, and this is the great thing for you younger people, it's a great thing about medical school or residency. Medicine is so big, you can find something in it. You can find something to do in it. And I figured I would. So I looked for a profession that I could write in the mornings and then go see patients, and I wound up being a psychiatrist. Now, those days were days of resistance, when we all really got out against the Vietnam War. And in the first year at Harvard Medical School, the Kent State massacre of 4 students was fresh. People went into the streets. They left all the colleges, et cetera. And we, as a freshman class at Harvard Medical School, had to decide whether we were also going to go on strike or not. Now, we were just about to start the kidney block. So people got up in front of the audience, in front of the stage there, and they said, well, if we go out on strike, we'll never learn the kidney. Others like me said, the hell with the kidney, we're gone. I never did learn the kidney, I can confess. And in the house of God, the chief, the villain, is a kidney guy, and I have a vague sense of it between the back of my neck and the back of my knee, something like that. But that was the environment. Okay, fast forward to internship at the House of God, which was the Beth Israel Hospital. We entered our internship as products of the 60s. We were really passionate about being good doctors. And our enthusiasm soon got kind of crushed by the dictates of this big, awful system. And so we weren't going to take it. And we were told, you know, we had learned to stick up. I mean, what we had done, in fact, for those of you younger, we had, when we were in college and after that, helped put the Voting Rights Act on the books, the civil rights on the books, and had stopped the Vietnam War. So you can see the House of God in some ways as a book of resistance to an unjust authority, as I said, to deal with injustice. And I'm going to talk later about how we doctors and nurses and even hospitals and patients are going to be called to take some action when, in a few years, how many years there is a national health system with the private system as well, but to band together to use our power to get what we want in terms of pay, et cetera, from that national system. Doctors don't get together, but we're going to have to in a few years. Just keep that in your mind. Okay, so fast forward to writing the House of God and having written it. I wrote it first as a catharsis. The thing that gets me going as a writer is something I call, hey, wait a second moments. These are moments when may even have happened today. You're walking along the street, you see somebody who's asking for some change, and you walk past. And then you say to them, hey, wait a second, why didn't I give the guy a buck? You know, he didn't look so bad. And and those things can happen very often, you know. Well, when a lot of those, hey, wait a second moments, this is crazy, piled up in the House of God, I said, somebody's got to write about this. It's up to me. So I started, you know, drunken stuff. Just got some of the guys together. We'd talk. We'd get drunk. We'd laugh. Laughter was what got us through. And so finally, I had a play I wanted to have done in New York, and I needed a play agent. So I wrote to this play agent, and I said, "Hey, I got a play for you. I'm looking for a play agent. P.S. I've got a piece of a doctor novel with me, as well." And she wrote back, "You're mistaken. I don't handle plays. Why don't you send me what you got for the doctor novel?" Well, I was a big drinker in those days and smoked cigars and pipes and all that stuff. So what I had was a single-spaced, on a typewriter, all kinds of, you know, rings of cigar ash, rings of glasses. It was, you know, all kinds of corrections. Sent it in. I forgot about it. And I was just starting that year my psychiatric residency at McLean Hospital, which is a big psychiatric hospital of Harvard. And I went on with my life and found a play agent. But about 2 weeks later, I'm in the secretary's office of McLean, and she says, so-and-so's on the line. And I had even forgotten who she was, you know. I said, oh, yeah. So I get on the line, and this is the first feedback from the world on the House of God. She says, well, I don't know if you're a madman or a genius, but I really like what you sent me. And I actually had the composure to say, well, I can't help you there, but I'm speaking to you from within a mental institution at this time. And so it went, you know, 7 drafts later with a very tough editor, very, very tough editor. It was a book. And that was all great. I was glad that book was coming out. As I say, I don't run on fear. And but then just before it was, like a month before it was coming out, the publisher said, I want you to come down to New York from Boston to meet with a lawyer. How many of us like that word? You have to meet with a lawyer, right? Not many. One good thing about being a doctor is that you're not a lawyer, you know, right? Let's face it. I'm serious about that. It'll go with what I'm saying later, because lawyers, it's very interesting. They're always adversarial. They're always into IVU, right? They're always adversarial. That's their job. And they think they can flick that off when they flick off the lights and go home. But they can't. They can't. I'll come back to that because I'm going to talk about the importance of connection, okay? So I went down to see I had this meeting with the lawyer and the publisher, and the publisher says, are there any characters in this book that resemble any real people? And my heart sank, you know. I thought, who isn't? You know, no, my first novel, nobody told me you're supposed to, you know, disguise people. So I figured I'd give them one. So I said, yeah, the chief of medicine, he's a kidney guy, right? And they said, well, how is he like that? Well, he looks like that, he sounds like that, he walks down the hall with his stethoscope tucked into his crotch, whistling, Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer true. So they look at each other and they say, oh, this is bad. They're shaking their heads. I'm thinking, okay, there goes, no house of God, right? So then they consult, and the publisher turns to me and he says, well, does he have a big red birthmark on his cheek? And I said, no, he doesn't. Now he does. He said, look at your first mention of Dr. Lego and you will see a big red birthmark. I call it the non-libel birthmark on his cheek. Well, Dr. Epstein, you're sitting here in court, but we notice you don't have this, you know. It's been quite a journey. I was routinely, there was a real split when it came out. I was loved by my guys. My generation loved it. The other generation hated it, and me, and did some pretty nasty things. And it had no reviews, no nothing, and it just kept going from guys and women like you grabbing it, you know. It's the only way a book sells for a length of time is when somebody says to the other person, hey, you got to read this book, right? Okay, let's talk about the house of God. Let me just say one other thing about when the house of God came out, I felt for some reason that I didn't want to promote it. I'd taken a pseudonym. I didn't want to promote it. I didn't think that's what authors did. It was a very idealistic stance. Just let it do what it's going to do. Until 2 years later, and I had refused a lot of invitations, 2 years later, I get a letter in the mail from the publisher. I open it up, and the letter says, I'm a doctor on call in a VA hospital in Tulsa, and if it weren't for your book, I'd kill myself. And I was very touched by that. I really was touched. And so from that time on, I said, maybe I've got something to say. And from that time on, I've been doing this. I mostly go, you know, where I'm asked. I've never advertised. So, let me read you a couple of brief passages from the house of God. This is true, the one I'm going to read you. At the start of the year, the runt was having a hard time. As he sat down to lunch, he took out a pill box, put a pill on his hamburger, and munched it down. When I asked what it was, he said, Valium, vitamin V. I've never been so nervous in my life. Does the Valium help? I asked. It makes me feel kind of sleepy, but I feel pretty unflappable. I'm writing orders for it for all my patients. What, you're putting all of them on Valium too? Why not, he said. They're all very nervous, having me as their doctor. After the others had left, the runt said he had a confession to make. It's about my third admission last night. In the middle of all this trouble with the yellow man, this guy comes into emergency, and I couldn't handle it. I gave him $5 if he'd go home. He took it and left. Now, the other thing I want to read is a bit different, and it shows you kind of why, another reason why I write. There was the true part of this was I had a patient of mine, a private doctor's patient of mine, who had metastatic cancer. She was about a 50-year-old woman, a terrible thing. She was on medicine, so we tuned her up, and she went down that day for surgery. They opened her up, couldn't do anything, sent her back up to us. And no one had told her what had happened. You know, I remember this, they said, I said, well, it's a surgeon's it's a surgeon's job. And they laughed at that. And they said, well, it's a private doctor's job. And they said, no, he won't come in. And in reality, I was scared, actually. I mean, that was where my fear broke through. I was scared. No one had told me how to do this, and I was really nervous. I was going to tell her this? I don't even know her, except for a brief interview. So I don't remember what I said, but I didn't do it. And frankly, I held that in me for quite a while, the shame that I didn't do that. I don't know who did it. But writing the House of God, when I came to that, I asked myself, what should have done? What should have been done? And that's one of the beautiful things about writing. You can correct something you're ashamed of, that you feel guilty about, in your prose. And so this is what I wrote. This is Roy narrating. I watched him enter her room and sit on the bed. The woman was 40. Thin and pale, she blended with the sheets. I pictured her spine x-rays, riddled with cancer, a honeycomb of bone. If she moved too suddenly, she'd crack a vertebra, sever her spinal cord, paralyze herself. Her neck brace made her look more stoic than she was. In the midst of her waxy face, her eyes seemed immense. From the corridor, I watched her ask Fats her question, because I had Fats do it, right? And then search him for his answer. When he spoke, her eyes pooled with tears. I saw the fat man's hand reach out and, motherly, envelop hers. I couldn't watch. Despairing, I went to bed. And then he did some stuff and he came back. And he looks into the room again. Fats was still there playing cards, chatting. As I passed, something surprising happened in the game. A shout bubbled up and both the players burst out laughing. And that, for students, can sort of qualify for how do you deliver bad news. And as we know, the way that bad news is delivered has a tremendous effect because of the connection or the disconnect on morbidity and mortality. In fact, we're learning more and more how much good connection matters in medicine, and even more how bad connection can be. I hear stories every day. You probably do too. Actually, there were some very positive things, helpful things in the House of God, too. This is something Fats said. I make these patients feel that they still feel part of life, part of some grand, nutty scheme, instead of alone with their diseases. And Roy says, what these patients wanted was what anyone wanted, the hand in their hand, the sense that their doctor could care. And the fat man talked a lot in the House of God of being with. It surprised me looking back on it, because I don't know where that came from. There was no fat man, I have to confess. I mean, I was more a fat man than other people. It was sort of part me, fat man, part me, Roy. Okay, so what was inhumane about our time in the House of God? Well, it's an old story and a deep story. We were in this big medical hierarchy, and when you're in a big power over hierarchy, the pressure comes down, and as in the book, the interns get more and more isolated. They're low on that totem pole, right? And then one of them commits suicide, one of them goes crazy. The only thing that you can do in this kind of, not only do they get isolated from each other, each of us got isolated from our experience of the system itself. That is, that we thought, I'm crazy for thinking this is crazy, and that's really bad, right? And we take it on ourselves. I'm crazy for seeing this is crazy. And the other thing in those days, our call schedule was stuff that we were almost completely isolated from our loved ones and friends outside the hospital. That's one good change. Barry only comes into the hospital one time in that book. She never dares come in again. Now, what's the answer? How do you deal with big power over systems? Well, you have to come to some kind of power with that and the main thing you do is you have to stick together. The interns have to stick together. The only threat to a dominant group is whether it's, gender or sexual preference or color or religion, whatever. The only threat to a dominant group is the quality of connection among the subordinate group. The quality of connection among the subordinate group. Isolation is deadly. Good connection heals. What's good connection? I'm going to get to that right now. Good connection is mutual connection. All right, let me explain that. Another lucky thing that I did was team up with my wife Janet and do well, let me go back. The usual, I did this work with Janet Suri, my spouse. The usual Western theories of psychological health and growth, right, are that these resolve in the self. You can measure a person's psychological health and growth by the self, right? Now, that was the standard way of looking at things, but it didn't really feel right to women, right? Women are valued for different things than us men. They're valued for care, connection, empathy, all that kind of, interaction relationally. And so my wife and some women created something called the relational theory. And the relational theory says the measure of a person's psychological growth and health is in the quality of their connections. It's not in this, it's in this. By the quality of their connections. This is a Stone Center model from Wellesley College. And so I started doing with Janet, what it is, it's a shift away from the I as central to the we as central, which informs each person, right? And when we did these workshops all over the country, but gender dialogues between women and men, all over the world, 20,000 men and women, boys and girls. And we talked about the shift to the we and how to do that, just using the language. There are some surgeons in the room. Let me talk a little bit about this as an example. In the old days, the patriarchal surgeons would say, if a patient came in, well, I did the tests, I'm going to do the operation. And usually, the person would say yes. That's an IU, right? The lawyer's thing. It's an IU. Now we have some surgeons who say, I did the tests and you can go for a second opinion, IU again. And now some surgeons are going further and maybe saying something like, well, we did the test, let's talk about what we're going to do. Notice, we did the test, let us talk about what we want to do. There's 3 we's in that sentence. Now, why is that important? And I learned this in psychiatry, to use the we rather than the I or the you. Because if you put the we out there in that visit, it concretizes the fact that there's a relationship here. There's a good connection here, right? You throw the we down, and so what will the other person, the patient, say? They will start off a sentence with, oh, I think we should, right? You put it there, and it confirms that there's a relationship. Surgeons, what's the studies have shown, what's the main reason surgeons get sued? Patient says, I didn't have a relationship with him or her, right? And relationship makes you a better doctor. Now, let me give you an example of all this that will maybe make it easier. Think of maybe going to lunch with a friend you haven't seen for a while. And maybe you're not feeling too good. Say you're a doctor and you got something awful to do in the afternoon. You're tired out. You've had enough of this electronic medical record for a while. And if it's a good connection, 5 good things happen. 5 good things, okay? To both people, it's mutual, right? Number 1, each person leaves that lunch with an increased sense of zest or energy, right? Number 2, each person feels more valued by the other person. 3, each feels more self-worth and worth of the other person. Number 4, this is an important one, each feels more empowered to take action. And then the 5 is, hey, let's have another lunch, is a wish to do it again. Now, power, we're talking about power, right? The old version of power is sort of Henry Kissinger. Ugh. Henry Kissinger was a powerful man. It's here. But both of those people at that lunch may not have felt very powerful during the lunch. But if it works, both are empowered. You, if you had to do this hard thing in the hospital, will go do it easier because you feel empowered as a person. Good connections are good medicine. I can't tell you how much I've come to believe that and under how much threat this is by these goddamn medical records. I really can't. You know, I don't think they do. I think they do more harm than good in terms of the things I'm talking about. And we can talk about that later with man's 4th best hospital. But the other 2 things are like 2 new laws in a way. Connection comes first. Okay, we're talking about a shift to the we, to connect. I'll use we, connection, relationships. Connection comes first, right? Take a new patient you're seeing. If you connect with that person, you'll hear everything, right? If you don't connect with that person, you won't hear anything. Connection comes first, okay? The next thing, and this is important in relationships, is that nobody gets it in relationship right. We're always screwing up, unless there's some perfect person in this room. We're always screwing it up with our loved ones or not so loved ones. So there are disconnects. The people who make it somehow hang in through a disconnect to the next whatever it is. So the idea is, this is the second law, it's not just what you say or do. This is with patients too. It's what you say or do next, right? In fact, even saying we've got a disconnect is a connecting statement. I mean, to look at it in global terms, some of you may remember the Iraq War when it started. They didn't know what they were going to do next with Iraq. They had no plan. They were going to welcome us with flowers. I'm bringing the world in, sorry. I won't mention the guy with the T word, though. That's too much. Okay. If you want to read about this, we have a book we wrote called We Have to Talk, Healing Dialogues Between Women and Men. I'll just tell you one. We talk about impasses between women and men. I'll tell you a quick one. Man and a woman are sitting on the beach having a beautiful picnic. Everybody's happy, they're connected, and the woman says, "What are you thinking?" And he looks like he's been shot. And he says, he doesn't say anything. He doesn't know what to say. He's feeling good. And then she says, "Can you tell me?" And he says, sort of, "I don't know." And he's tense and feels a little ice starting up toward his heart. And she says, "Sure you do. Come on, tell me." And then he's gone. He has this women, right? Glazed look in the eye, right? Retreat, frozen heart, right? He says, "Don't spoil it," right? And they're off. Okay. This is normal in men. It's called, we labeled it male relational dread, right? And what men feel like, see if this is familiar. What men feel like is, they're thinking when this is going on, she just wants to get closer, going on, nothing good can come of my going into this. It's just a question of how bad it's going to be before it's over. Right? And it's never going to be over. Right? We call that the dread yearning impasse. Right? These are natural things that were brought up in most cultures. All right. let me just quickly talk about two other things that were in this progression of my learning about the value of connection and how to do it. My wife and I also wrote a play called Bill W. and Dr. Bob. I don't know, have any of you heard of that? Heard of the play? It was off Broadway for almost a year. It's about the relationship between the two men that led to the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I just bring it up because the best cultural model of everything I'm saying is Alcoholics Anonymous and the other 12-step programs. The story was that Bill Wilson, who had been sober for a couple of months but was a stockbroker from New York, a terrible drunk, by chance, by these butterfly wing flickers, happens to be in Akron, Ohio, on Mother's Day in 1935, and a person who has been trying to get Dr. Bob Smith, a surgeon, right, a doctor, to get some help, arranges a meeting between these two guys. Bob wants nothing of it. He's totally hungover from a bender the last night. He used to go into the operating room drunk, stuff like that. And Bob said, I'll give this guy 10 minutes most. They talked for 6 hours, and that's the birth of AA. Now, what happened? Well, we came to think that it had to be a doctor that Bill met, because Bob says, when Bill says, well, a doctor in New York told me maybe this is a disease, and Bob says, what? A disease with signs and symptoms, a course and a progression, implying what? A treatment? So he framed it in a medical treatment, right? And they decided that alcoholism was a disease, and it had to be pursued in 3 arenas: physical, psychological, and spiritual, which is the holistic movement. It started the holistic movement in America in 1935. Now, in case some of you don't know, it's important to know with alcoholic patients and addicts, it's not a religious program. Both of these guys had no faith in a traditional God because it didn't work. They tried everything. They prayed. They'd gone to church. Nothing. What they did was frame it as a spiritual program. What does that mean? Well, as in one meeting, a friend came to Bill when he was still drunk, and Bill didn't want any part of him. And he says, damn it, you big lug, you don't have to believe in God, you just have to admit that you're not God, so that something else outside that stubborn Vermont self can take hold. So I just mention that because it's a very good example of good connection, good mutual connection. I didn't say that in that leaving the lunch piece, it's a good example, if it works, of mutual connection. What's that? Each person feels seen by the other, and each senses the other person feeling seen, right? There's this click. I mean, it's like when you fall in love, right? There's this click. You just are on this mutual pathway. Now, that's not going to happen with patients very often, but a connection can happen. A connection can happen that will empower both members. Okay. The next step is a book, the step in my development in trying to understand all of this, it's a book called The Spirit of the Place, and you probably haven't heard of it. It didn't get the attention that the House of God does because I'm known as the House of God writer, and it's really amazing. Publisher is such a crapshoot, people would accept it, and they say, well, it's not like the House of God, we can't sell it. So it was published. It's published by Penguin now. And it won 2 National American Best Novel of the Year awards, which is nice. I always wanted to write a novel. Well, I always wanted to go back to my little town, Hudson, New York, and join this roly-poly old general practitioner, they don't much exist anymore, in this little town as helping him out and taking over the practice. I really liked it because he really helped me in my in my youth. And I couldn't do it in reality, so hey, it's like that making things better in that breast cancer thing. I did it in fiction, and that's the story. The guy is a doctor who gets forced to go back to this town. He's been divorced and traveling around the world in Medicine Frontier, and then gets a call that his mother has died. And so he has to go back. And when he goes back, he's told, he's broke, and he's told that all the money, which is a lot, requires him to live in his mother's house in the middle of town for a year and 17 days, which he doesn't want to do. But one thing leads to another, and he does join this doctor. So it gave me a chance to see what is medical practice really like in small towns, right? I'm just going to read a couple of these things. Maybe it'll remind some of you of this day and age. His name is Bill Starbuck. Actually, I chose the word Starbuck before there was a Starbucks, because it's a common Quaker name, actually. Anyway, ushering Orville into the, Orville is the name of the main character. Ushering Orville in, Bill's hand was on his shoulder. As always, Bill was a toucher, a great toucher. You might forget what he told you was wrong with you or what he was going to do about it, but you remembered that touch. Hours later, the place he'd touched still felt special, warm in winter, cool in summer. Good to see you, son, Bill said, settling in behind the big cluttered desk and another yes smoking sign. His words came out in a calm, deliberate way. His greeting blew the scent of fresh scallions at Orville. Bill's other addiction besides nicotine was fresh scallions. When in season, his rural patients kept him supplied. And this is something I did, which got me into medicine, actually. As a teenager embarked on a course of rank failure, when I refused to talk with my parents or sister about anything close to the heart, I was sent to Bill for advice. Bill never gave any advice. He sat and smoked and told stories of the 14-point buck and the gunslinging doctor and the stirrups and what was in the safe. The summer after a desolate sophomore year, when Orville was bored half out of his mind and depressed out of the other half, Bill began to take him around with him, let him help out in the office. Orville had been enthralled by the realness of doctoring. I wanted to try to describe what we love about it. Orville had been enthralled by the realness of doctoring, the intense contact with people at the crucial times of their lives that often helped them heal. Coming out of a family where nothing much ever seemed to take place, it was incredible for the boy to see that things actually happened in life, actually got done. Have I ever felt more at peace, Orville wondered, than in the dawn light alongside Bill in his black caddy on the drive home from delivering a baby somewhere out in a God-forsaken shack in the middle of nowhere. This man had grown him up. And then at the end of that meeting, yeah, well, not a lot of rumors around here. The only person who really knows what's going on around here is me. People tell the truth in here. A fellow like me gets to lift up the lid, peek in under the edge, see past the bullshit. And it's cool, isn't it? That's what we do. That's what we can do. And then finally, just a piece about a delivery and a love affair here. The nurse had paged him for a delivery of twins. He'd been tending the couple through the pregnancy, her first. They were poor and black, a man and woman he'd known vaguely as a girl and boy. There's something wrong, the night nurse was saying. Come quick. And this is after the first time that they've made love, this couple, Miranda, she's called. Wrong big time, he recalled. A tap of death on a baby's shoulder. He explained that he'd have to do an emergency C-section. The couple agreed. He scrubbed in fast and did the section. Twin boys. One was well-formed, robust, squalling. The other was microcephalic, its head the size of a doll's, but with lips and nose and eyes crammed together and with no forehead, giving it a frog-like look. Trunk and legs normal, but for a remnant of tail. It was horrible to see. yet transfixing like something you see in a bottle of formaldehyde in a medical museum. The nurse took the healthy baby to the father, leaving Orville to wait for the other to die. Luckily and quietly, by the time he'd gotten done with closing the groggy new mother's abdomen, it did. Orville went out to the father. He was still holding the healthy baby in that awkward way that new fathers do. The nurse had told him the other had died. What happened? The man asked in shock. The other baby lived only a few minutes. It was deformed. Can I see him, Doc? Orville hesitated. The older doctor in him, the good old Doc Starbuck, would have patted him on the shoulder and said, no, son, better you don't. The younger doctor applauded his wish, though knowing that once seen it would be indelible. Orville said, you can, sure. I just want you to know that you'll never forget it. Him. I want to see him. The nurse took the healthy baby, and Orville and the father went in together to see the other son. He'd been cleaned up so he looked better, less frightening. The father reached out a hand and touched the perfect shoulder and then the squashed head. He bowed his own head and crossed himself. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. He looked up at Orville. His eyes were wet, sorrowful. He said, thank you. And you, Orville said, feeling in this man the power of facing into in a world that as a rule turns away. I think she'll want to see him too. Fine. The father picked up the dead baby to take him to his mother. Later, during a break in the action in the emergency room, he walked out into the parking lot and searched in his pockets for the half-smoked Perodian matches. The night was crisp. The little town was iced up, and the air tasted like cold quarters and seemed stretched tight as an eardrum, so it was like you could hear everything. He thought of the dead twin who would always be almost there, floating there like all the dead, and the live twin. He thought of Miranda, of her histories, and of their lovemaking. And he whispered out loud, this is the one that will survive. Now, I wanted to read that because a real step, certainly in my life, was to understand something about suffering. And at the end of this, this is a tough job he has. He's brought in, what happens is he's brought in to heal the town, and the town heals him. And at the end of the book, he's faced with a difficult choice, one thing or another thing. And he doesn't know what to do, or he doesn't know what to do. And something kind of comes over him, and he hears something like it come to him that says, whatever you do, don't spread more suffering around. Whatever you do, don't spread more suffering around. And he makes his choice. And that's what I mean, Janet and I have had a Buddhist practice, so it's the Buddhist first noble truth, right? There is suffering. The second is you can address this. And what I've learned is, we know this as doctors. This is, everybody suffers. It could be a big suffering or a little suffering. Everybody suffers. The issue isn't the suffering. The issue is how we walk through it. If we try to walk through it alone, stand tall, draw a line in the sand, what I was fed as a boy, we're going to suffer more and we're going to spread more suffering around. However, if we walk through suffering with others, with caring others, and guess what? As doctors, that's our job, right? We're there at those moments. That's our job, to help. If we ourselves also walk through it with caring others, we're not going to suffer as much, and we're not going to spread more suffering around. So it's maybe a way of framing in non-medical terms, but in quite spiritual terms, what we can do. Okay, now I'm very excited. Everybody wake up. I've never written a part of this to. I've just finished it, so no tomato throwing. Who knows what's going to happen, right? Okay, it's called Man's Fourth Best Hospital. I'll read you a couple of short things. The epigram for this section of the book is from Shakespeare. Virtue, a fig, drown thyself, drown cats and blind puppies. Put money in thy purse, follow these wars, fill thy purse with money. He's talking to someone who's in love and going crazy with love. He says, virtue, drown thyself, fill thy purse with money. Okay, money's a big, you can't write about medicine today unless you write about money. Okay. Man's Best Hospital was the third hospital founded in the United States through a charter of the legislature by a group of Mayflower descendants in the first decade of the 1800s. All funds were donated, including a farm complete with cows and a bull. Its first patient was a tailor with the pox. He claimed that he did not catch it in the city of Man's Best Hospital, but far away in Boston. So clearly, this can't be a Boston hospital, right? Man's Best mission was summed up in 2 New World oaths for its doctors, carved in stone in foot-high letters on the facade of the original Pink building. In pain, no, everyone is our neighbor. Our best charity of spirit is the easing of human suffering. Everyone our neighbor, charity of spirit, a best mission, yes, back then. The lineup of oil portraits in the marble halls were all white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They had a noble mission to provide good health for all, even the poor. Imagine that. If you didn't have the money, you still got the care. In its first year, it became the teaching hospital of the best medical school, the BMS, which is familiar from the House of God, right? For the first 100 years, non-WASP docs were non-welcome. There were no places in the city where Jewish and med school graduates could go for their internships. This led to a wave of construction across the USA of Jewish hospitals, houses of gods, including a flagship, the House of God, across town. This soon filled with red-hot young Jewish doctors, much like some of the ones at MBH. But these guys, like any subordinate group who were denied the best, were hungry. By some miracle, a recognition of their red-hotness, the house, too, eventually became affiliated with the best medical school. Clear so far? Yeah. The 2 hospitals were different. The house was run by God's chosen people, MBH by God's frozen people. MBH was hard-nosed. The house was Hamish, a Yiddish word for a hospital featuring mensches, good-hearted guys. In the modern era, MBH had become a magnificent hospital in every way. But several years ago, MBH had been bought by Buddy's, a corporate conglomerate of most of the BMS hospitals, bought and being crushed under the dead weight of Buddy's, a 73,000-week bureaucracy, filled, oddly enough, with bureaucrats. None of them provided any care. This $26 billion cost center, this corporate whale, was inserted into the healthcare food chain between hospitals and insurance conglomerates for no other reason than cash. It had succeeded in its mission, using its purchasing power against insurance, quote, to get prices up, to monetize, to cost more. That's true, actually, of the institution I was thinking of. Never mind that in healthcare, value equals outcome over cost. Who cared about value? It became the biggest healthcare empire in imperial America. And so a great hospital, its great doctors and other healthcare workers, as well as its tens of thousands of patients, all of us became allies as victims of Buddy's. Being bled of cash by Buddy's, MBH was soon deep in debt. Buddy's realized that MBH could no longer make any real money by honoring its mission of service to the sick poor, and insisted it re-engineer its mission to make money off the healthy wealthy. But worse than losing money, Man's Best Hospital was losing prestige. Many years ago, U.S. News and World Report, a tabloid magazine that knew nothing about hospitals, for some reason, say cash, began rating hospitals. Imagine that. They just started rating hospitals. Why? How? Who? The ratings, seeming by whimsy, changed each year. Hospitals were at their mercy, going up and down as if they were passing each other on escalators in Macy's. MBH was the exception. It was steadily #1. But then in lockstep, as Buddy's rose, Man's Best fell. 2 years ago, it had dropped to number 2 behind Stanford. And just this year, it had dropped another 2 rungs down the ladder to number 4 behind New York University, which was kind of, okay, but also behind the House of God. Not okay. For some reason, the House of God, a BMS hospital, had not joined Buddies. Neither Stanford or NYU had a Buddies. Now man's best was known as man's fourth best. A few WASPs on man's fourth best board showed hints of a strange feeling, sadness. One even got depressed. Why did they call in the fat man and offer him whatever he wanted to do? Because fat's now embodied and might just reclaim for them the 2 fallen icons of man's fourth best and of America itself, money and fame. Fats had become incredibly rich and famous, first in Hollywood, doing the Ball Run of the Stars, then in Silicon Valley, founding a biotech startup, hot on the trail to find a pill to restore memory, especially in Gomers. He decides, they said, whatever you want to do, he decides to start a clinic affiliated with man's fourth best hospital, open clinic, to put the human back in medicine. To put the human back in medicine. Okay. This, I'm sure, will sound familiar. I want to be sure to leave time for questions, so I'll speed it up. Okay. So he rounds up the guys and some women now. So by the end of the book, I got criticized for the role that women played in the House of God, even though it was the way it was. There was only one woman in our internship class of 16. This time the fat man by the end of the book has parody of women. I feel very glad about that. Women can read this book more easily, I think, than they used to read. Okay. The electronic medical record system is called HEAL, H-E-A-L. We docs had an orientation to HEAL, a 4-hour-long video and workshop with a rosy-cheeked and smiling, clean young guy dressed casual, tagged Bob. Bob's first step was to pass out a single sheet of actual paper for our signatures. Quote, a routine form required for your employment, stating you will not, in public, say or write anything negative about HEAL. Your usual gag order, like Epic's, but lots better. Did you know that Epic has a gag order? Epic has a gag order. If you work at the Brigham Hospital, the MD, you can't say or write anything negative about Epic. Okay. A gag order? Gags? It was clear that Bob was not ordering us to tell jokes. Bob was waiting. We shrugged, signed, passed the sheets to the front. It would turn out to be just about the only sheet of actual paper we saw having to do with HEAL. Folks, Bob said, clicking on the first slide, which printed out his exact words, we are at war against the health insurance companies. As he went on, it turned out that this war, like all wars, was about money. On our side of the screen, he said, we are fighting for the highest payment for our work. On their side of the screen, they are fighting for the lowest payment of our work. And how did we fight this law? By gaming HEAL, codes of each disease diagnosis and treatment to max out money. In principle, we could max out cash by clicking on little boxes in 2 ways. The first was qualitative, clicking on the worst disease diagnosis, most for severe TORM, requiring the most treatment. The second was quantitative, also clicking on as many different worst and severe disease diagnoses, requiring the most elaborate treatment for as long as possible. Health insurance, the army on the other side of the screen, tried to minimize our maximums of money. Bad news, said Bob, and they have lawyers trained to catch us in an illegal, like lying, which we do not do. The good news, we have 334 people in the billing building. The Billables, also the name of their a cappella group, by the way, our allies, our in-house battalion in the war. In real time, they track your choices to max out money. We have man's best lawyers to fight HEAL's lawyers. The terms Bob used to hide this war of gaming of the system were unintelligible. Bob made clear that the more expensive the DX and RX codes click, the more fourth best money was made. We nicknamed our elite billing enforcer team, he said, Coders for Cash. They work out of a war room at an undisclosed location. We are watching each of you for your choice of click codes from admission to discharge. True. Fiscally, doing procedures on patients makes the most money. Surgical procedures make the most money. Medical care makes the least. He paused, then said fiercely, except for the diagnosis of sepsis, severe. After you click sepsis, the pop-ups ask mild, medium, or hot, severe, like at a Thai restaurant. But sepsis is by definition a life-threatening blood infection, always severe. Monetized, compared to mild or medium, severe is a cash cow that wins hands down. We will dog you till the sun goes down. If you click sepsis, you always click severe. The code for cash. Is this sounding familiar? Vaguely? Good. But then why, I asked, do you have boxes for mild and medium at all? Camouflage, he says. For this fatal disease, we have no choice, Hippocratically, but to click severe. He went on, I tuned out, but caught his summary. This is true. It all boils down to earwax. He spoke passionately about how to squeeze the most money out of earwax. First, in a moving historical tour, he said, earwax is an untapped pool, rampant in our senior citizens, a cause of deafness. How many of you routinely earwax your patients? We of the Fat Man Clinic took this as rhetorical and did not reply. The money in earwax flows by clicking this diagnosis in almost all patients and removing as much volume as you can. Bob then showed in the big screen a doctor at healing. You have to choose between two codes for earwax removal. 50773 is for just taking a syringe and washing it out, reimbursed at $77.33, but 40774 uses the metal scooper thingy to remove it, $182.57. The difference, $105.24. And doing both, $359.95, more than the sum of its parts. Multiply per person per year, millions. Guess which procedure for full extraction and max liquidity is preferable? Both. Do the right thing. The right thing for all of us at the Fat Man Clinic was to walk out. I was with Chuck and Naidu, a new woman on the team, walking down the hallway. So Chuck, what'd you think of that? Man, it all went in one ear and out the other. Okay. One more thing, which I think we will also, that's us, right? I mean, that's what we're at the mercy of now. Is it terribly exaggerated? I mean, the earwax was told to me by somebody who went to one of those meetings. Okay. It's the last thing I'll read. This is about the visit to the doctor. This is what Roy comes to at the end, basically. Your visit to your doctor has become satire. You walk in, lucky if you get eye contact, and sit across the desk. Your doctor is trapped, hunched behind a computer screen, back or shoulder to you. The doc asks a question, you answer. The keyboard goes click, click-de-click, faster and faster. On and on it goes, and you find yourself in the patient's dilemma, right? Do I keep talking or wait for a break in the action? Usually the next question. Is he or she still listening or not? The new definition of a good doctor, one who can contort his or her body to touch type while still making eye contact. As you keep waiting, two questions may enter your mind. That's the patient now, patient's mind. What is she or he doing? What you don't know is that your doctor is sitting there in front of that screen seething because he is forced to sit in front of a screen seething instead of what he wants to do, to talk and listen and be your doctor. He spends 60% of every workday, at least 6 hours in front of that screen. Family doctors spend an additional 3 hours at night at home during pajama time, digging out from under the pile up on the screen. This is the doctor's dilemma. You might think she's doing this because it will be better for your health care. It may not be. It may even be worse. Worse for your care, and for sure, worse for the care of your doctor. Worse for the care of your doctor. It's only better for the money, the healthcare industry. The machine, you see, was not primarily designed for care, but for billing, to make as much money as possible. We doctors are caught in this mess. We're not only treating the patient, we're treating the screen. And it's not that your doctor wants to turn his or her back on you. It's the healthcare industry that has turned its back on both you and their doctor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, this works if I come out here? People hear me? No? We got questions, comments? This is another thing I appreciate, is that there's some time for questions, unless everybody leaves. Yeah.
Very insightful. Thank you, Dr. Shem. Has the revelation of concurrent surgery at this fourth best hospital, do you think that will have a lasting impact on that and other practices that are really income enhancing and not patient enhancing?
Good question. Everybody here? I know that all about the double booking at Mass General Hospital, which is not this hospital. In fact, I know the guy who did my hip at Mass General is a dear, dear friend now, and he was the one who, standing up to blow the whistle on, does everybody know what this is? Double booking of operations, where, you know, sort of like a quantum of physics. The surgeon is in two operating rooms at the same time, double booking. It's a big story that came out probably about 4 years ago from Mass General Hospital. They were caught. My doctor was a whistleblower, and he's suing them now, actually. The papers did a terrific story, and now that it's revealed, there has been some real good action in not, you know, that you can't do this. You know, it's sort of not enough, but it's some. And it's not over, because if this goes to trial, it's going to be in national newspapers all over. I think it goes to trial next year. It's a good question. I mean, but my friend, who operated on me, had gotten the Best Surgeon of the Year award at Mass General Hospital. And had been on, he's a tremendous doctor and surgeon. He was summarily fired by an envelope being put under his door one day. Good question, though. I think it's going to have an effect. See, doctors can stand up for things. They really can make changes. And from what I read is, what I said is, you know, I'll just put this out front. I have high hopes for man's fourth best hospital, because it is, I think, does everybody agree, it's where we are now, kind of? In terms of working in this system? Yes, no, nods, yeah? Yes. It gets it, right? I didn't invent it. There's going to come a time in the next several years when probably there will be some kind of national health care system, probably with the private system going along like supplemental systems for Medicare. At that time, we doctors, you know, are going to have to get together and say, we are not working for anything like Medicare payments. Right? We have to join with patients who don't like this system either, and nurses, and et cetera. Nurses almost always win when they threaten a strike without had to go on a strike. And I'll tell you one story from Boston. The Boston nurses at the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital, wanted better stuff, hours and pay. And they worked it all through. The night before they were going on strike, the mayor came in, they made the deal. Like 2 days later in the paper, big headline, Peter Ben Brigham spent $24 million to get ready for that strike. I just want to say, let me ask a question. Has anyone ever heard when someone falls down in a theater, the cry go out, is there an insurance executive in the house? We are the workers. We do the work. A threat of a strike would win us what we got if we're allied. And it's going to come to that in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, I hope. But doctors, we're so individual and trained so individually. Anyway.
That was going to be my exact question. I'm right here. Hello.
Over where?
Hi.
Oh,
Well, because you intrigued me at the beginning when you mentioned, doctors need to come together to change the system. So, and you just kind of answered what I was going to ask. But, I think that's one thing that's been difficult is, how do doctors, organize together? Because you're right, we're so many different specialties. And also, I think so many of us want to do the right thing for our patients, so I don't know, I also feel like I'm kind of stuck in this position of not really knowing how to advocate for physicians. So, I don't know, I'd love if you even elaborated more on that, as how we could band together to actually create change.
Well, there's nothing like an execution to, what was the phrase, to concentrate your mind, There are lots of things out there. In fact, the AMA is getting more liberal. It really is. In fact, they're going to publish excerpts from this. They're interviewing me and stuff, I think the majority of doctors who are members of AA, which is a fairly conservative organization still, want, national health care. But there are lots of things. There's the Physicians for National Health Care is a great organization. There's Steffi Woolhandler's organization. I guess that's hers. I think the thing to do is just let's look at what's out there. We need some catalysts. We need some real catalysts. And forgive me if I'm being grandiose, but I'm going to try everything I know how to make this a catalyst of getting to people, patients and doctors, about what is wrong here. Maybe it's too far-fetched, I don't know. But there's a lot of stuff on the web, and just keep reading, keep talking, keep telling people your experience. Yeah.
Just a couple of quick questions that are related. I have found in my personal practice that the 13 rules of the house hold up pretty well over time. And I'm also, a lot of the vernacular that was in the house of God was vernacular that was used in my training. And I'm curious, were those rules and were those terms present in your internship? And how much of those originated with you as you were writing the house of God?
Okay, everybody heard that? A few of them were there. Well, no, I don't know. Some of the terms were there, like Gomer was there, and some others. I think some of them came through, like in the book, people just talked and we made jokes and they came out like that. And so I naturally put them in the book. The most helpful guide for any doctor is H plus BUN equals Lasix dose. Not scientific, but it works every time, So I sort of put them together. It's hard for me to remember now, but one thing I do remember very clearly, which is it's really amazing. These laws are up in the on-call rooms now, It's really amazing. Who would have thought it? When I came to the last law, which I was very cynical in those days, and I started to type. I remember my editor said, "Why don't you, put laws after it, gather them up." And I came to the last law, and I was typing, the delivering of medical care is to do nothing. And then all of a sudden I was a grown-up. I said, that's not it. No, I'm not that cynical. And I wrote, the delivery of medical care is to do as much nothing as possible. And that's the most important law in general. It really is, because you forget, especially, where procedures are the way that people make money. But they were mostly, I've tabulated them, mostly, I guess. I don't know. Who remembers? Yeah.
So you spoke of isolation, and it's my impression that this entity increasingly invades, pervades, and increasingly affects most aspects of our society. And in particular, I mean, not just individuals, but the workplace, and unfortunately, I think affecting our children more than any other generational aspect in our society. Have you noticed that? And if you have, I mean, have you any thoughts on addressing it?
That the workplace, in what way, the time you're away from your children and stuff?
No, isolation. I mean, when I was younger, we were outdoors playing and interacting and growing and thriving. And I don't know if you notice it, but I particularly do. It seems that each generation moving backwards from my age, they're more isolated. They're not out playing. They're not out interacting. They're not growing and thriving the way that we did.
Yeah. Everybody heard that, I'm sure. That's a tremendous question. It goes with everything I'm saying. I mean, what can I tell you? I have a flip phone. And the reason I have a flip phone is if I had one of the ones that most of you have, I'd never write another novel. I'd be addicted to it. In the book, I hope my wife doesn't kill me, she's addicted to her iPhone. So at one point, she's always texting. Mine is sort of like that, not really. I exaggerated it. So they're in bed, and they're being very nice with each other, and he's trying to talk to her after a hard day, and she's texting. So he figures, okay, this is the way I can get her attention. So he says, I've decided to get a divorce. Click, 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 yeah, And I said, the divorce lawyer is going to be here tomorrow. What? It's a huge issue. I think it's inescapable to realize that the use of the iPhone and the other, devices and all of that is having a profound effect on our children. What was that figure? You probably know, some of you. In the last year, 2 years, the suicide of adolescent girls has gone like this. The thing about the iPhone and all of that is it gives the illusion of connection, but it's not real connection. I remember you guys my age, first time you ever had to call a girl on the phone and ask her out for a date, you just about died. You died. And so, but we got the experience of real relationship. There was this big rise, I study alcoholism, a big rise in college alcoholism, probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And Jan and I were thinking, why did this come about? Why did this come about? And it was correlated with the use of, it was the first generation that didn't have to make real contact with the other gender. They're off at college and they're living with women and men, So I think it's a huge problem. I don't know what we're going to do about it. I really don't. It's horrific.
So first a comment, I think I'm excited to read your book because it clearly hits so close to home. We recently received a system-wide email about appropriate coding for cerumen impaction, so that really hit home.
What'd you say?
We got a system-wide email about how to code appropriately for earwax removal just within the last few months with our large group here. Yes. So I'm really excited to read this. But my question is, So I'm a third generation physician. I grew up hearing about trials of medicine from my grandpa and then trials in medicine from my dad. And here I am 10 years in. And I'm wondering why now? You know, what happened? Was it a point you reached in your career? Or is it what you see happening in medicine in general that prompted this book now?
Why now? Why now? I'll tell you why now. There is actually a McClaskey scale on burnout, something like that, McClaskey? Yeah, there's a scale on burnout, measuring burnout in doctors. By the way, I never want to hear that word burnout. Burnout makes it like doctors are Tinder, and nobody's talking about the fire. This isn't burnout. There's been good stuff on how it's a moral dilemma that we are faced with, like people in war. A moral dilemma to go against what we believe. Anyway, there was a great study, of course I never remember who did it or why, a great study where they looked at the 5 variables on physician burnout, or the 4 variables on physician burnout. And nothing was correlated with anything except one thing. It looked at it historically over the years. It was the implementation of the medical record that had worsened all of this stuff in 2008. That's what it was. I'm sorry, I sort of forgot to just tell me I got it. Why now? Well, I think that's why now, because it's about power. It's really about power. Let me look at a basic way that I look at it, and then I'll talk about that power for a second. I don't think this is going to work, even how sophisticated the designers out in Wisconsin, the cheese lady, get. Because what we do in our screens is an iterative process. We go click, we go click, we go click, another box click, we go click, like every single time drawing a pixelated picture, right? It's an iterative process, okay? We doctors, what do we do best? We're integrators. We have an integrative process. It used to be, anyway, patient comes in, oh, hi, take a brief history, blah, blah, blah. Go, okay, why don't you go to behind the curtain to take your blah, blah. And while the patient is there, the doctor may make a couple of notes just to remember, but he's thinking. Goes and does the exam. She comes back, and what does he do? Or while she's getting dressed, what does he or she or they do? He pauses. He pauses. He muses. He thinks. And, I presume most of you know what the thing is and you know what to do about it. Because you sense it as well as, do the iterative stuff. So the big deal, there's a simple, the House of God, the fat man in this book, running this clinic, in the middle of the book, gives, much to the original display of the other docs, to the team, he gives a lecture with chalk on a blackboard. Even though he's a high-tech guy, he uses chalk on a blackboard. And he writes, the 6 rackets of American healthcare, follow the money. And it took me 2 months to understand all of the interlocking. You wouldn't believe it. I didn't know a lot of stuff. And then at the end, I'll sort of reveal something. I can't reveal much. But at the end, toward the end of the book, he says what to do about it. I couldn't put it out there unless he figured it out with the help of the others. And you know what it comes down to? What he writes on the board, what he says? He says, we got to squeeze the money out of the machines. We got to squeeze the money out of the machines. Meaning they're not billing machines. As Chuck said, the other thing Chuck says in the book when he leaves that earwax thing, he says, well, man, they're saying we got to lie here about what we're doing. And somebody said, yeah. He said, So long Hippocratic oath, right? I mean, this is a moral dilemma for us. This is not right. If we go to primarily a national health care system, well, one more, illustration is better than me ranting. I gave a talk to some Boston University medical students a year ago or whatever. And they were really, they're totally computer, they've never seen paper records. You know, they're computer literate and facile. But they were complaining because they don't get any teaching from the other people, and they hate Epic. They hate Epic. It's so awful, they said. We do it fast, but it takes us a long, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, have you ever seen a better system? And I didn't know what they'd say. You know what they said? 2 or 3 of them? Yes. I said, what? They said, the VA. I said, the VA? That's interesting. Why the VA? Why do you think it's the VA? And I said, how? Well, it turns out you can write notes. You don't just, cut and paste. You don't do, what do they call, workarounds. And they said, because it's not for profit. If we take the money out of the machines, all kinds of things disappear, like buddies. There's no reason for those 334 people to be there. As you know, the administrative cost of a private healthcare system now is 33%, a third. The administrative cost for Medicare is 3%. And the VA system, well, now they're changing, they'll fuck it up, sorry. It's private, they're getting a private, they're getting a new computer, I forget what it's called. But now, the VA is interoperable. It goes everywhere, even to the Indian Health Service, So, what do we do? You will not, if it's not for profit, you will not be billing the way you're billing. You're not going to be doing all that, right? One of the things I realized, very simple, one of the things that actually makes national health care systems work pretty much, Australia, Europe, et cetera, is because every procedure, pretty much every procedure is pretty much paid the same all through the country. So you don't have a battle with an insurance company. We stop all our stupid battles with insurance companies. Why in the world would we spend our lives doing this? As one person said, I used to leave the hospital and say, well, I really cared very well today for my patients. Now she says, well, I really took good care of my computer. It's like, I'm very passionate about this. I don't know. I know what's wrong, and you know what's wrong. We don't like being treated this way. We're just pawns, and every day I hear how bad it is. Okay, how are we doing? Okay, maybe one.
My colleague had a question.
Why don't we take these 2 more, okay? Yeah.
Several years ago, as a state medical society, they had a meeting on how to organize, and it was the largest attended society meeting in history.
Wow.
And the lawyers from Department of Labor's representatives explained to us that we could not organize and we could not strike because we're not employees. And it kind of died there. I think we all have a desire to take control back, but we don't know how to do it. And the bureaucrats, to me personally, have referred us to as sheep. We do what we're told. Now, as a psychiatrist, what insight do you have into that?
Psychiatry's not going to help. Well, probably 15 years ago, I wrote an op-ed in the Boston Globe called The Doctor's Strike. First of all, if we want to get this done, screw the people who are telling you you're not employees. You have no idea how that goes away if you have all the doctors in this room saying, or half even. Anyway, you have to, we have the power. That's the issue. If we didn't have power, look at nurses. What I said in that article a long time ago now, they published it, was that 2 years before you're going to strike, you start taking, you see if you can get signatures on a petition, just saying, we don't know exactly what we're doing, but we're going to, would you sign this petition that we want, national health care or something like that. You know, you could choose something that would get a lot of people while keeping the other system too. And you get some people, you know, you get people to sign. And nobody takes it seriously. Then you do it, you know, you start at 2 years, then, you know, 18 months. You do it again, and maybe some paper picks it up, and you get like 40,000. We'll go on strike. Give it a date, two years from July 4th of whatever, maybe. And you keep doing that. This is the way things happen. We haven't done anything yet. There's no specific thing that we're saying. We're just seeing if people will sign up to really try together to take some action. I think if you had real leaders and smart people, you go along that way. How long do you think it would last? I mean, suppose there's 100,000 doctors, just 100,000. How many doctors are in the country? Forget. 400? 650,000? Okay, so say you get 150,000 doctors who have signed their names. On such and such a day we're going on strike, which would absolutely kill care. They couldn't do it. And I'm saying if it were done right, you know, 6 months to go, Time Magazine, the New York Times, everything. You know, there have been very few successful doctor strikes. There was one in 1974 of the House staff in New York that they won in one day. The thing is, they cannot survive for one day, not one day, if we don't show up. Now, of course, the thing is, oh, we're hurting patients. Well, I don't know, you know, we'll deal with that when we come to that. But it's not just us, it's allying with patients, which is what the National Health Service in Britain is doing. They have allies with doctors getting better. Allies with doctors, nurses, patients, and frankly, maybe even hospitals, because they're getting screwed by this too. That's my only idea. Maybe one more question.
This isn't a question. I'm going to give you a real example of what's happened. 20 years ago, the largest hospital system in the state created what they called a neurosurgical orthopedic group. And they decided there was an X amount of dollars that they were willing to spend over a year, and it would be distributed to that group. And if this group went over that amount, they would reduce the pool of money that they had decided would be spent on orthopedic and neurosurgical services. So you were right, he was right, you cannot individually separate docs in different practices get together. There was a law created during World War II to prevent that. But if you are a group, you can bargain as a group. So we created an LLC of orthopedic surgeons and neurosurgeons. And we went to this particular insurance carrier and said, no, you can't do that. You're going to have to deal with us, and we will create some sort of payment system for our services. I don't know how many of you guys remember any of this. This was about 20 years ago. Big things in the paper. We were meeting with the CEO of this company as well as their chief financial officers. And what happened was we said, until you sign this contract, we will not, provide services unless it was an emergent basis. And what happened was people in the adjacent communities who actually said, we support you. We even got a couple of checks because things were going in the paper that the insurance company was writing which weren't true, and we could rebut them. And we also had meetings at Weber State where I was to speak and have the financial officer of this institution, of the insurance company, debate with me, and they backed out. I had paperwork like this backing all the information that I had. But what happened was these physicians in the adjacent communities started seeing the patients.
Yeah.
And at the same time would tell us that they weren't doing it. So I'm telling you guys, you're exactly right. The only way that you're going to deal with this is to be in a cohesive group. But doctors are trained to think independently and not to work together in something like this.
Thank you, thank you. I think we have to stop. I'm going to be signing books, I guess. Couple of things. You can pre-order this book. It's coming out in November. That's one thing you can do if you think this is going to send a message. And I'm going to be signing some books out there now if you want. And you could try to get in touch with me. I've got cards I'll hand out when I'm over there with my email and stuff. I think it's inevitable that doctors will get a better deal. We will stand up. Thanks.